A believer. We can glory in all the great things that Jesus has done for us, and we certainly should. And we can talk about that for a long time, but also that processes within us. That means something for our day-to-day lives, and that's kind of where Paul has taken us. And so I hope that you'll turn into to Colossians chapter 3 at the end of that chapter as we're moving toward the last chapter, when that last chapter is going to kind of go a little bit quick for us, at least in our purposes here, because he's going to be talking to people and about people that we don't know a whole lot about. But yeah, today, just want to tell you about something that a lot of you are going to be able to kind of rest on your laurels. Y'all are going to be kind of laid back and kind of laughing at some other folks who really need to hear the message that Paul is going to be sharing with us today. I was told about, and of course I wasn't around for the election of the 1960s, but I was told that as John Kennedy was campaigning for president back in 1960, that he came to a West Virginia coal mine. He was walking through there talking with the workers, and one of the workers confronted him, just walked up to him and simply said, "I hear you're the son of one of the wealthiest men in the country. Is that right?" Kennedy just kind of looked at him and said, "Well, yeah, it is." And the miner said, "Well, I heard you got everything that you ever wanted. Is that true?" Kennedy said, "Well, pretty much so." The miner then followed up and he said, "Is it true that you've never done a day's work with your hands in your entire life?" Kennedy said, "Yeah, that's true." The miner simply looked at him and said, "Well, let me tell you this. You ain't missed much." There's a lot of folks that we have to work. There's a few of the privileged that don't have to, but most of us do. I read several years ago, and so the numbers here are a little bit old, but I think we can still certainly attain to this and identify with this. If you are exhausted, if you are tired and you work hard and you're just really spent, I just want you to know that your exhaustion is justified. And there is simple mathematics that will prove that. And it goes a little bit like this. The U.S. has a population of 200 million. Obviously, that's old now. But the U.S. has a population of 200 million. Of these, 72 million are over 65 years old, leaving 128 million people to do the work. When you subtract the 75 million that are under age 21, you get 53 million. There are also 24 million employed by the federal government, which means 29 million left to do the work. The 12 million in the armed forces leave only 17 million to do the work. And when you subtract from this 15,765,000 who are in the city and state offices, and 520,000 who are in hospitals, mental institutions, and similar places, the workforce is reduced to 715,000. That's fine. But 462,000 of those are bums and vagrants, leaving only 253,000 to do the work. There are 252,998 people in jail, leaving, you guessed it, just two people, you and me, and I'm getting tired. So if you're feeling tired, you should be able to identify with that. Work is work, and work can leave you exhausted. It can also leave you bewildered. And I want you to understand that as we have been walking through Colossians, the Bible is talking about how different relationships work and how the gospel should permeate every area of life. Now, the last couple of weeks have been simple. It's been simple for us to identify with. That's because we've talked about Jesus within the home. In fact, we've talked about that for about 3 weeks now. But now he's going to really invade something that we may not want him to be a part of. And that is our work life. How we are going to spend our vocation, and what does that look like for the believer. I hope you're there in Colossians chapter 3. And as we began this section, backing up in verse 18, we looked and we saw, at that point, we saw how he's really going to address the home, and he's going to begin with the most intimate relationship that is there, and that is the relationship between the husband and the wife. And from there, he's going to expand out a little bit further, and he's going to talk about the relationship between parent and child. And we looked at that for 2 weeks. And now, in that same context, he's now going to talk about the relationship between slave and master. Now, we said then, at that time, that it almost seems odd to kind of lump that in, but it really wasn't in that day. Because what he's talking about here is, he's talking, I guess, primarily, most significantly, he's talking to the men in that household, and the slaves were considered to be a part of that relationship, of the home relationship. And so he's simply taking the most intimate, moving it out of husband or wife, moving it out to children, and now he's talking about those who are within his home who are at work for him. Now, here's where Paul has really come under a lot of flack from all different areas. He has been used and maligned in a lot of different ways, and really unjustifiably so. And one way that he was used here, at least in our history in America, was when it came to the issue of slavery. People would look at Paul, and they would justify slavery by reading his works. And they would say, well, he doesn't do away with it, and therefore he is in approval of it. That's really not fair at all. Then you have other people who are looking at it, and they don't like slavery, and they're saying, well, man, he's not abolishing this thing, and so therefore he must think it's okay, and so we don't like Paul, so we're just going to throw everything that he has to say out the window. All of that would be unfair. There were a few different reasons why Paul did not call for the outright abolishment of slavery. First of all, you can look at, there's a story in the Bible. It's a little small book. It's just a little bit past Colossians, and it's called the book of Philemon. Philemon was a slave owner, and he had a slave named Onesimus. And Onesimus had taken certain, he actually escaped and went away to work and tried to get away from his master. And Paul stepped in, and within that book, if you will go through and read that book closely, you can certainly see where Paul was not a fan of this establishment within the community. It's not something that he thought was ideal. He was simply saying that because this is the situation that you're in, this is how you should live. So it's not that he supported the institution at all. He simply supported believers, and he wanted to share with them, this is how, in your circumstance, this is how you live as a believer. Now, there were other reasons too. Certainly, the entire society, the whole social structure, the whole economic structure in the Roman world was built around this idea of slavery. And for that to be abolished, it would have been basically a brand new world. And so Paul was a revolutionary in a lot of different ways. He was a revolutionary when it came to religion. When you're talking about somebody who held on to the idea that there was only one God, that was revolutionary then. It's not so revolutionary to us, but it was revolutionary then. And so, spiritually speaking, he was a revolutionary. The fact that he would say that there's only one way to heaven, there's not many ways to heaven, there's not many gods or those kind of things, there's only one way to be saved, and that's through the person of Jesus Christ, revolutionary. When you look at how to live out this religious life, this Christian life, when you talked about things like humility, and when you talked about things like submission, and when you talked about love, agape love, the self-sacrificing love, that was revolutionary. Listen, Paul was revolutionary when it came to that stuff. One thing he was not revolutionary about was he wasn't revolutionary about society, about how social issues work themselves out. He simply wanted to look at a believer and say, listen, here's the situation that you find yourself in. You may not like this or whatever, but here's how a believer will do it. In fact, he did the same thing that Jesus did. Jesus said, hey, this is the circumstance you find yourself in. This is how you live it out. I'm not telling you how to change your financial structures or all those kind of things. He says, you want to find yourself if you find yourself in a place of poverty, this is how you live it out. This is how you live it out in a Christian setting. This is how you reflect Christ. And so when he's talking to slaves here, he's simply telling them, I'm not telling you to revolt. I'm not talking about a revolutionary. I'm saying this is the circumstance that we find ourselves in. This is how you reflect Christ in the circumstance in which you find yourself. And so let's see what he said. Let's see how he says that. He says in verse 22 of Colossians chapter 3, he says, slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters on earth, not with external service as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. Now remember, chapter and verse added many, many years later, and so Paul is going to continue in that same vein in chapter 4 and verse 1, and he's simply going to say, Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. How do you live in this way? Now, we don't live under those same social structures. Thank God we don't. Thank God we don't. We don't live under those same social structures, but the principles that he is going to share with us here are giving us what we would call a theology of work. A theology of work. Somebody says, well, hold on just a second. Work has a theology? Yeah, everything has a theology. You think about what the word theology means. It comes from ology. We say it's study of, and I guess that's how we use it. It comes from the word logos, which is the word for word. And theo is God, and so really it's just words about God. Literally, it's words about God. And so when we're talking about how does God play in to my work situation? So this is where some of you folks, some of you retired folks, you're like, yeah, let me just listen to this one. This will be fun for everybody else to listen to. So listen, even if you volunteer in any kind of an organization, or you volunteer at a place of work, place of business, any of that, all of this is going to be applicable. Everything he just said is going to be applicable to you as well. Now, just for context, okay, we've said that there is a sister passage over in Ephesians, and we certainly talked about that when it came to husbands and wives, but it's also true when it comes to this idea of working. And so if you'll switch over with me over to Ephesians chapter 6, we're just going to read through what he says there to give us a bigger picture. And he says some of the same things, but he says it in a different way that might bring clarity to what we're trying to say. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 5, here's what he says. Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in the sincerity of your heart, as to Christ. Not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters, do the same thing to them, and give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. How do we work for God? He said, listen, you render your service as if you were working for the Lord. And then a couple of verses later, back in Colossians, he says, because it is God that you are working for. How is it, if we know that we are working for God, how does that play out? And what does that mean for the work situation that you find yourself in right now? Now, I don't have an outline for you. I didn't print one out, but there are 5 things that I would encourage you to write down. It's just a scrap piece of paper. I want anybody who has a job, anybody who volunteers in any way, I would encourage you to write these 5 things down. It's not too much, but it is valuable for us to live out the Christian life in our vocation or in even our volunteer situation. And so there are 5 things I would have you write down. Number one, and that is I would write down the word their agenda, as in theirs. It belongs to them. Their agenda, not your own. He uses the word in verse 22, back in Colossians, he uses the word obey. It's the same word, and you can make of it what you will. It is the same word that he uses to tell the children to obey their parents. We are to obey. We are to find what their agenda is. So what is the purpose of the company that you're working for? And that becomes your purpose within it. You're not there to change things. You're not there to run things how you think they ought to be done, or to do things how you think they ought to be done. You are there to render service to that organization. And you find out what they want, what they are moving toward, and that is what you do. That becomes your mission as you are on the clock, or as you are doing what you are doing in the name of that company. So you may not, and not only that, but I would say even that you become aware of what that is. You don't walk through the motions ignorantly. You want to know, what is it that they're after? What is their mission statement? What is their vision statement? Those kinds of things. And some of them have them printed out, some of them don't. But you try to become familiar with, this is what this company wants to achieve. And so as a part of that, I'm going to move in and I'm going to adopt that as my own. I'm not going to come up with my own thoughts about how this ought to be done unless they ask me. If they ask me, I'll have an opinion. I'll share that opinion with them if it betters the company. But I am here to do what they want done. That's why he says to obey. Number two, in no particular order. Be honest. That sounds awfully strange. Be honest. In verse 22, he uses the phrase, fearing the Lord. Fearing the Lord. We are to be honest. There are certain situations that you find yourself in that you could take things from that company. You could take money. You might could steal from even electronically. You might could. He says, no, you're working for the Lord. You might be able, this company may never know, but you're working for the Lord, and so you fear the Lord. It's not just about money. Sometimes you can steal time. You can waste all that time. You can go to work and never do anything that they are telling you to do, and they've given you directions, but you're over here and you're on your phone all the time. Listen, you can take all kind of things. You can take stuff. You can take money. You can take time. He says, be honest, because you are to fear the Lord. I was in here Friday night. My wife and I were in here Friday night. I was walking around and I found right back over in this area right here, I can't remember where it was, right over in this area, I found an envelope. I found an offering envelope. And this is not the first time. This is the first one that I've found, but I know that I've talked with several of you, and you have found different envelopes around, usually it's somewhere toward the back, and it had money in it. And by the way, if you want to give, I mean, I guess you can leave it there in the seat if you want to, but we do have some giving kiosks. We got one back there on the wall back over there, and we got one over here, and if you have an offering you want to give, just kind of slip it in there, and if you want to give electronically, we certainly have those options as well. But apparently somebody was giving money, they just weren't really sure and haven't been sure as to where to give it, and so they just kind of leave it in the pew. And I'm looking at that thing, and I'm thinking, hey, you know what? I could have me extra. I don't know what was in it. I'm $20 or whatever. I don't know. I didn't open it. But I thought, hey, I could have me an extra $20. I could take my wife out for ice cream or something like that, And so the first thing I did was I just took it to the box back there and I just set it in. There are different ways that you could take from the company that you work for. And it's not always hard to do. I worked in retail. There were times, I'm being the assistant manager, there were times where I worked there and I was alone. There are different ways, and then there's, of course, there are people who are a lot smarter than I am, and you could take electronically from the company that you work for. You need to understand that you work for the Lord, and the Lord is your master, and the Lord sees every bit. You are not getting away with one penny. You're not getting away with 1 minute. You're not getting away with one item. God knows. And so he says, listen, be honest, because you're working for the Lord, and work as if you fear him. Number three, work hard. Work hard. In verse 23, he says, do your work heartily. You should be working hard for that company. No lazing around. I mean, obviously, it depends on what the job there is that they're giving you to do. I know people who work for the government and they're just like, I'm just so bored. I don't really know what to do. Some people have that kind of situation. They're in that situation. But when they give you the opportunity to work hard, you work hard. Again, going back to my days working at the toy store, which I brought up last week, and being there alone. Listen, I personally hated not doing something. I felt guilty. I was bored. It made time go by so slow. And so you find stuff to do that's going to help that company. It might just be sweeping something or straightening something up or whatever it may be. Again, your context, you have to apply that how you can, but you simply work hard. Because I'm telling you, people are going to be looking at you. They are going to, as much as you don't think is happening, they're going to look at the job that you do, and they are going to tie it to your faith. Let them know that you work hard. Number 4, produce. Like, as best as you can, bring results for the company that you work for. Bring results. Produce for them. My mind goes back to the parable of the talents. To the parable of the talents when they came and they gave talents, and those three guys, they walked out, and one had 10 talents, the other had 5, they all had differing number of talents. And the last one said, you know what, I know you're demanding, and so I just went and I just kind of covered mine up and didn't want to lose it. I didn't produce for it, but I also didn't lose it. And you remember the master came back and he said, this is unacceptable. Unacceptable. I expect results. Bring results. And listen, usually, the old saying goes, if any plan will work if you will. Usually, if you'll just work hard and you'll follow what the company has given you, you'll produce the results that they're after. So when you work hard, you want to produce. You want to bring about the results that the company is looking for. And if that's selling fries to go along with the burgers, then offer fries to go along with the burgers every single time. Whatever it takes, produce. Obviously within a Christian setting and within a Christian mindset. And then fifth and finally, and this is just one word, and sometimes, listen, I understand people are not always happy with the job that they are in. In fact, you hear about that probably more than the other way around. So this is a lot easier to say than it is to do, but the last word, the fifth word, that is care. Care. It needs to matter to you that company succeeds. And here's where I get that from. First of all, notice in verse 22, he talks about sincerity of heart. Verse 23, he uses the word heartily, which means literally from the soul. And so what we have here is we have Paul in a roundabout way saying, you need to put your heart and soul into what it is that you're doing. And of course, that's all wrapped up with working hard and the other things that we've talked about. But it should matter to you that this company succeeds in what it is that they're trying to accomplish. They need to know that when they turn to you, that they're looking at someone who at least has a mindset that says, hey, this matters, what I'm doing matters. And that they can trust you with the responsibilities that they are putting in your hands. I think about Jeremiah chapter 29 when Jeremiah is talking with his own people. And his own people are put in a situation that they don't want to be in. They're in a place that they don't want to be. They're with people that they don't care about. They want to go back home. They want to be released from the situation that they're in. And Jeremiah says this. He says, look, you are where you are for a while. And so while you're there, you need to pray for the prosperity of your city. You need to work for the prosperity of your city. You need to settle in and do your part. Care about it. Invest. Put your heart and your soul into it. And if you want out and God opens up the opportunity of, hey, you get to move on, that's fine. Thank God for that. But while you are where you are, put your heart and soul into it. Care. That is what it means to work for God. And I don't know who you work for. You might work for a doctor's office. You might work for a school. You might work for a church. You might volunteer for some other community organization that's out there. This is what it looks like when you are serving God. And make sure that everyone knows you are working ultimately for Him. Don't put Him in a bad light. Now, he says here, he gives us a couple of reasons as to why that would be. He says in verse 24, he says, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. A reward. Now, I want you to, you need to understand how revolutionary this is. You need to understand what a big, big deal this is. He was talking to slaves. And do you know why they were slaves? They were slaves because they had nothing. Most of them became slaves not because they were not because it began the way that we read about it beginning here in our country. It began because a lot of them were in financial straits. They couldn't provide for their family. They were indebted, and they didn't know how to pay off that debt other than to become a slave for the people that they were slaves for. They had nothing. And now Paul is telling them, oh, listen, not only do you not have nothing, not only do you have something, you have the inheritance of the King of Kings. There will be a great reward. Now, that reward is not automatic, okay? That reward is not something, listen, salvation is a free gift of God. It is. But the rewards that will come along with that when we get to heaven, the rewards there will be worked for. And he says, listen, you're a slave, you're going to have all the inheritance if you simply do as you are working for him. And so the first reason that he gives for doing it is the reward. But then the second reason comes in verse 25, and that is because of accountability. He who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. Now, you think about it from a slave standpoint, or from a worker standpoint, an employee standpoint, if you will. And you're talking about somebody who is, they're higher up. They seem to be more important. They're more established. They have more stuff. They have a better position and all that. And he comes along and he says, listen, everyone is going to be held accountable. And it won't matter what your background is. And so they're sitting there thinking, hey, yeah, it doesn't matter how privileged they are. It doesn't matter how much they are, how important they think they are. God's going to get them. Now, that was probably for some who didn't have the nicest of owners, not nicest of masters. That was probably something that would have been somewhat comforting to them. Yes, God is going to make it all right. But he was also talking to them specifically. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes we think, you know what, with the situation that I'm in, with the boss that I have, and the amount of work that I have to do and no more pay that I get, I have a right to do this, that, or the other. I have a right to take this stuff. I have a right to take this, to take it easy. I have a right to not care about them. I have a right to not work hard for them. Paul says, listen, it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter if it doesn't seem fair to you. It doesn't matter if you're underpaid. You probably are underpaid. But God is still going to hold you accountable no matter what your position is. Whether you have nothing or whether you have a lot. God will hold us accountable. We still work for him. We still carry out those 5 principles that we just got finished talking about. Because there will be accountability. Now, he does go on, and he makes sure that we understand, yes, that accountability does apply. It doesn't matter if you own the company. It doesn't matter how hard you work to get to where you are. It doesn't matter how many degrees that you have. None of that stuff matters. You will be held accountable. God is not, listen, he is not impressed with how much time you spent there. He's not impressed with how quickly you climbed the ladder. He's not impressed with how many employees you've got. Or how many people answer to you, you still answer to him. And so it will be accountability. And that's why he says in chapter 4, verse 1, he says, grant to your slaves justice and fairness. Master, listen, slaves were considered property. Property. They were like things. Now before we get too upset about this, in the Roman world, so were children, which is why he addressed parents, and so were wives, which is why he addressed husbands in the same context. Listen, slaves were just things. It was just property. You could do what you wanted to. You could kill them if you want to. You could sell them off if you wanted to. You could let them free if you wanted to. You were in control. And Paul comes along and he says, listen, don't treat these people like things. Treat them like people, like a real person. Treat them, and this is what he was telling Philemon in the book of Philemon. Treat them as bearers of the image of God. This was the revolutionary part, was what he was telling the masters. Treat them as bearers of the image of God. and see your business as belonging to God, and see yourself as a steward of what God has given to you. If you're in leadership in your company and you have people that answer to you, treat them well. He says, he uses specifically, he talks about justice and fairness. Treat them like they're real people. Treat them as if you have a master. In other words, here's what Paul says. The only difference between you and them is the position that you hold. You're no better. You're no worse. You're still people. Treat them like people. They answer to you, you answer to God. Y'all in the same boat. Which brings to my mind what Jesus said when he said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How do you want God to treat you? That's how you treat those who answer to you. Revolutionary thought for the masters of his day. This is what it looks like in the Christian workplace, for the Christian worker. Whether you are in control or whether you answer. For most, honestly, if you've been around it for a while, for most, we kind of fall in both camps, don't we? There are people who are positionally speaking, who are under us, and there are people that we answer to. And so what we do is we take both of these, and we can go through and we can read all the leadership books that you want to. We can talk about all those principles that are out there, whether it comes from a Christian standpoint or whether it's somebody out in the world who wrote them. And we can take those, and those are fine. Those are great things to learn from. But the best thing that we could do was simply say, God, what would you want? How do you want me to live, and how do you want me to work? And God spoke through the Apostle Paul. And he says, slaves, obey, serve, with heart, with soul. Masters, be fair, be just, because you too will answer to someone else. God, I pray that as we consider our work lives and even our volunteer lives, that we would be a shining example of the Christian ethic in our workplace. And God, where we find ourselves falling short and it becomes about us and what we want and what we can get out of this and how we can stroke our own ego and do things our way, I pray that we would submit wholeheartedly to you. Not just when it comes to church and reading our Bible and those kind of things, but how we conduct ourselves in the workplace. And I pray that it changes how people see us. That they know that they can trust us at work. They can give us more responsibility and we can handle it. They know that we're out for the betterment of that company, that organization, even that section of the government. Help us to be about your business. And then, Lord, I pray that somehow that would give us a platform where we can share the gospel because we have lived the gospel. And may it all be done to honor you. We thank you for being the greatest master, the one over us, and help us to emulate that as we live here on earth. In Jesus' name, amen. If you have questions about anything that we've talked about today, any decisions that you might have to make, of course, obviously all this comes back to your relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And if you have questions about what that means or how you could give your life to the Lord, we would encourage you to use that same texting service that we just talked about earlier in the service. Text the word response to 912-513-2929, and that'll begin a conversation that we'd love to have with you. Before you leave here, if you have any prayer needs, maybe it might be a prayer request specifically at work, about somebody at work, about a situation at work. We've got a couple of folks over here. Glenn and Liz are ready to pray for you. Just go over there and you can share with them as much or as little as you want. And that's their job is to, this morning, is simply to pray for you and take however much time you need to pray over that. So be sure and follow up with that if the Lord so leads. Ladies, thank you all for leading us today. Close this out today.
Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Yes, where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. You are dismissed.